Hello, everyone. On behalf of CCGH, I would like to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on how to become a Canadian IPCC author. Before we get started, I would like to just go over a few housekeeping rules that my colleague here has pasted in the chat. First, can also switch the slide to the housekeeping slide, and then yeah, we'll get started. So first, you are welcome to ask questions at any time using the chat or QA feature. Any panelists who are not actively speaking may respond to questions directly in the chat throughout the session. And during the designated Q&A periods, everyone may also raise their hands to be selected to ask questions verbally. Once selected, you will be given permission to unmute yourself. And if you would like to direct your question to a specific panelist, please mention their name before your question. Any unanswered questions in the chat will be answered if time permits during the Q&A session, or collected at the end and answered via a frequently asked questions document emailed to you after the session. The chat function is available for relevant discussion and questions. Just a reminder to please keep all messages respectful and on topic. And just to keep you notified, the session is being recorded, and by participating, you acknowledge and consent to being recorded. If you experience any technical issues, please reach out in the chat and a team member will assist you. And just to get started, to give us an idea of the diversity of our audience today, please feel free to type in your research area, where you're located, your treaty lands, and level of experience with the IPCC in the chat. And now, without further ado, let me introduce you all to our host, Dr. Shirley Harper.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. That's all about how to be an IPCC author. Thanks so much for being here and showing your interest in participating in the IPCC process. Today's session is going to be conducted in English. The French session will be tomorrow at the same time. And if you're interested in attending the French session, you can find a link to that session in the About section of the English version Eventbrite page. As was already mentioned, we're going to be recording today, so just so you're aware of that. So today I'm going to be your host. I'm Shirley Harper from the University of Alberta. I'm a professor and a Canada Research Chair in Climate Change and Health, and I'm also currently serving as a Vice Chair for Working Group 1 within the IPCC. I'm calling in from Edmonton today, which is Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. If you haven't had a chance to already do so, please pop in to the chat the lands that you're calling from today, because I know that people are calling in from quite a large diversity of regions and territories. So we've already gone through the housekeeping. So now I think what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of an introduction to the IPCC and also the 7th assessment cycle. So I'm going to share my slides. Okay. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the IPCC and then also introduce the AR7 chapter outlines. This is going to be a short presentation, so I'm going to do my best to cover as much as I can about the IPCC process in just 5 to 10 minutes. So the IPCC's mandate is to assess the state of climate science. It's a UN organization that sits under the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environmental Program. There has been a number of reports that have been released since 1988 from the IPCC over the period of 6 different assessment cycles. Each assessment has produced really valuable reports that have fed right into decision-making or underpinned decision-making. So for example, in the 5th assessment report, this really helped inform or helped shape the Paris Agreement. And in the 6th assessment cycle, the reports fed into the first global stocktake, especially at COP28. So while these are scientific assessments, they are policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive, but they have had really important impacts, especially in international policy arenas. So how does the report process work? Well, we have 10 different steps that we go through. The first step is the scoping step, where we meet with experts from around the world, both from academia and from governments. And then that scoping report, or that the outline, goes to a government panel of all the different members of the IPCC, and it goes up for approval. And we've actually already gone through these first two steps. And right now we're in step number 3, where we're looking for nominations for authors. Those nominations can come from governments or different observer organizations. Then after that step, we'll be selecting the authors. There are 2 different drafts that are drafted that go out for peer review, the first order draft and the second order draft, and then a final draft report, an SPM. And the SPM, or the Summary for Policymakers, is sort of what makes IPCC a little bit unique from other UN reports. So the Summary for Policymakers goes through a line-by-line approval process with all the different government member states. And then once the Summary for Policymakers has been approved, then that implies that all of the content from the underlying report is approved as well. And then the report goes through to publication. Okay. And so a lot goes into these reports. So these are just some numbers from the 6th assessment cycle. So in the 6th assessment cycle, there were 796 authors who assessed over 100,000 different pieces of literature. And they also had to respond to over 300,000 peer review comments. So this is an incredibly peer-reviewed process. It's probably one of the most rigorous peer review processes that I've ever been a part of, because it's essentially open to anyone in the world with expertise in climate change to peer review the reports. And authors have to respond to every single comment that peer reviewers make. So, and all of those comments, all the peer review comments, and all of the authors' responses are all publicly available online. So it's not only incredibly rigorously peer reviewed, it's also very transparent in its process. So this is where we are in the process in 2023. That's when we kicked off the 7th assessment cycle. We have a special report on climate change in cities, which is already well underway. And right now we're talking about the 7th assessment reports. The governments have agreed that the 7th assessment cycle will close in 2029. And so this is where we sit in the process. So how can all of you get involved? Well, there's different ways to become engaged in the IPCC process. The first is to contribute to the literature base. The published literature and different knowledge systems are really key to a key input, obviously, into the report. So one of the things that you can do is publish highly relevant articles in literature that can go into the assessment process. The second thing you can do is participate as an expert reviewer. So you can review that first order draft or the second order draft and provide comments for the authors. And I have to say that, being involved in the 6th assessment process as a lead author, these peer review comments really do shape the report. So if you want to have an influential role in the IPCC process, but you don't have time to be an author, being a reviewer is a really important role to play as well. And then the third way is to be an author. So there's different types of authors. There's the coordinating lead authors, and there's usually 2 or 3 of these per chapter. And so these people coordinate the lead author teams on each chapter. Then there are the lead authors, which are responsible for different sections or different topics within the chapter. There are also review editors, and the review editor's job is to make sure that all of the peer review comments are responded to appropriately and fulsomely by the lead authors. There are also contribute authors and chapter scientists. And there's a lot of buzzwords and jargon here, but don't worry, because in the panel, each of the panelists will be able to unpack what these roles looked like in the 6th assessment cycle and what the responsibilities are, and both officially and unofficially for each of these roles. In terms of the timeline, the call for nominations went out just recently on March 7th. And the deadline for different governments and observer organizations to upload their nominations is April 17th. And then those decisions will be made on authors sometime in the Northern Hemisphere summer. Leslie, at the end of today's session, is going to walk us through the application process for the Government of Canada. But this is from a higher level perspective, what the dates look like. So what did each of the chapters look like? I'm going to provide a high level overview of what the different chapters are for each working group, but I'm going to do this at a very high level. So I definitely encourage you to check out the outlines that are provided online because they have a lot of details that they go beyond just the chapter titles. So instead, what I'm going to do is sort of provide the intended narrative for each of these reports. So the first is Working Group 1, which covers the physical basis of climate change. And there are sort of three different main sections. The first 4 chapters really talk about the current status and trends of the physical climate science. Chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8 looks at different futures. And then the last 2 chapters and the interactive atlas are really about information for responses. Another way to look at this is through scale. So we have both global and large scale changes as well as regional changes that can be broken down this way. So this is sort of a bird's eye view of Working Group 1's chapter structure. For Working Group 2, this is a schematic that they have created to represent what their chapters look like. So the first are the global chapters. So these really look at risk, including vulnerability, exposure, of different climate hazards. And there are different chapters on adaptation, losses and damages, as well as finance. They also have regional chapters, which includes Africa, Asia, Australasia, Central and South America, Europe, North America, and the small islands. If you're calling in from Canada, chapter 12 might be of interest to you. They also have different thematic chapters, which range from water to health and well-being, food, forestry, fiber and fisheries, and so on. And this assessment report, there'll also be an overview of the technical guidelines on impacts and adaptation that you also might be interested in contributing to. Working Group 3 has 15 different chapters, but if you look at them slightly differently, they can be viewed through this framing. So chapters 2 to 4 look at past and current trends and futures, sustainable development and mitigation. Chapter 5, 6, and 7 are really focusing on the factors that enable or constrain mitigation. Chapters 8 to 14 are different chapters on sectors, systems, and their integration. And there's also chapter 15, which focuses on carbon dioxide removal. So this is a really high-level overview about the IPCC and the different chapters that you might be interested in participating in through this cycle. I hope you do consider applying. There's lots of different interesting opportunities to become involved and engaged. So that's the end of my presentation. I think that we might be moving right into the panel session, but Amira, maybe I'll ask you to comment on our timing here.
Hi, actually, we can have some time for some questions if anyone would like. If you have questions for Sherry at all, please feel free to type that into the Q&A, into the chat, or even raise your hand, and then we will give you permission to unmute.
It looks like there is one question in the Q&A. It says, perhaps if you can clarify if the only path for a person to get involved as an author is from Canada is through the Government of Canada process. So there is the Government of Canada process, which Leslie is going to walk us through at the end of the webinar. There's other ways that you can be nominated. So you can be nominated from an observer organization. And there are so many observer organizations that I won't even attempt to name them all here. But if you look on the IPCC website, they're listed there. So you can also be nominated by an observer organization. If you're a citizen of another country, you can also contact the focal point from that country to find out opportunities to be nominated that way. And then the last way to be nominated is through a bureau member. So bureau members have the ability to also nominate prospective authors. I see another question in the chat from Lisa. It says, do you have specific chapters you are interested in contributing to, or can you broadly apply as an author or reviewer? You have to specify your interest and sort of like list the different chapters that you're interested in contributing to. That said, sometimes as long as you apply, you might be considered for other chapters. So if an area of expertise is missing from a chapter, they might actually pull you into that chapter instead. So don't feel, for example, in AR6, I don't think I applied at all to be part of the North American chapter, but I ended up being a lead author on the North American chapter because they needed health expertise. So they pulled me onto that chapter instead. So that type of moving around does happen. So you sort of pick the ones that you'd like to apply for, but you might get moved around based on your area of expertise. Kata has a question. How specific does your expertise need to be for each chapter? Are you nominated to the working group in general, or does the chapter, the cluster? So a similar type of question. I think I have a similar answer. Maybe the only thing I would add is you don't need, I mean, it's helpful to be specific in your areas of expertise and the keywords, but you also submit a short CV. And so we get a chance to look at the diversity of the experience you bring there as well.
Excellent. So I think that is all the time right now that we have for individual questions. If you still do have more questions, still feel free to put them in the Q&A because we will collect them after, and then you will receive a package from us probably answering your questions. And again, we have our panelists here at the end with their contact information, who you can also contact directly. And so with that, yeah, thank you guys all for being here. And we will begin with our panel discussion. So we'd like to introduce some really amazing people who are involved in the IPCC authorship process. So for everyone on the call, as you hear the panelists speak, please do feel free to think of any of the questions to ask. And at the end of the panel discussion, we will open the floor to all of you to hear your questions and comments. So again, jot it down, put it in the Q&A where you can. So unfortunately, Dr. Greg Flato will not be able to attend today. We do wish him all the best. And so Dr. Shirley Harper will be stepping into our panel. And with that, I'd also like to introduce Dr. Chris Dirksen and then Marina Banwe Martinez, who are also part of our panel today. So you want to give a quick wave and hello? Excellent. So let's get down to business. Our first question is, I'm really curious to hear about why you're all involved in the IPCC. So what is your IPCC story? So Greg, Chris, if you'd like to start with you, and maybe you can introduce yourself more and share your story.
Sure, absolutely, Mira. Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for joining. Yeah, my name is Chris Dirksen. I'm the acting director of the Climate Research Division of Environment and Climate Change Canada. My background also is as a research scientist in CRD, and I'm based in Toronto. And I guess I'll just jump into my response to this question, which is, I think Sherry actually raised a really important point. When I first thought about my response to this question, I thought immediately about step 3, which is my role as an author. But actually, the foundational components of IPCC work actually is roles 1 and 2, which is contributing to the underlying literature, which is cited in IPCC reports, is totally important. There's no assessment process if there's no literature to assess. So if you're working in a field and you think there's a really important thing you want to emphasize to get captured by that process, there's definitely a trick to writing papers that are IPCC citable. You have to have a certain scope, a certain view that you sort of try to capture, usually quite broad, but answering an assessment type question. So yeah, so always think a little bit about how you can contribute on that side. Then the expert reviewer portion, that's actually how I started my entryway into IPCC work more formally. So I'm kind of old, so I started contributing as in AR4. And when you sort of start, at least when I first started, I didn't have the confidence to contribute as a reviewer, broadly. I'm a snow scientist by training, so all of my review comments focused really only on the snow subsection of the cryosphere chapter. And then with AR5, I had a bit more confidence, so I commented more broadly on the cryosphere chapter as a whole, got into the water cycle a little bit. And then really as an author, my entry point, I think I was very fortunate. In the 6th assessment cycle, there were a series of special reports. So in addition to the 3 main working group assessment reports, there were 3 special reports, one of which was the special report on oceans and cryosphere in a changing climate. And given my background as a cryosphere scientist, this was really topically a really perfect entry point for me. So I was able to join the author team of chapter 3 of the SROC, which was polar regions. And so really that fit right within my expertise, which was great. And the other interesting thing about SROC is that the special reports, actually, a lot of them span working groups. So when you work on the main assessment report, you're part of either the working group 1, working group 2, or working group 3 assessment reports. For the SROC, it was a combination of working group 1 and working group 2. And I, as a scientist, always found that I sort of straddled the line between those working groups because I was interested in the physical changes to the climate system, but also the impacts of those changes. And so I was really lucky with SROC to be able to, work on text, craft text that was spanning working group 1 and working group 2. So that's really how I became involved. I mean, I always have viewed that the IPCC is really a critical avenue that we can use to ensure that rigorous climate science is available for the policy community. I think the IPCC is about as visible as you can get with respect to international climate science assessments. And so it's really important that Canada have as dynamic and active a role at all levels, contributing to papers, reviewers, authors, bureau members. We want, I think, Canada to be involved at all levels. And yeah, so I'll comment a bit more on my experience a little bit later, but I hope that gives you a little bit of flavor, at least how I got involved in the process from the beginning. Thanks, Amira.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. It's really great to hear that you can get the best of both worlds or try different things and you don't have to silo yourself. And so with that, I'll also pass it along to Sherry. So I know you talked a little bit about your IPCC story, but let's hear a little bit more details.
Yeah, thanks. I guess, like Chris, my IPCC story started before the sixth assessment cycle, but as a user of the reports. When I was a grad student, I cited the reports in my master's thesis and in my PhD dissertation. Then as I transitioned to a faculty member, I use the reports in teaching all the time, especially IPCC figures. And then in the SROC report, the special report on oceans and cryosphere in a changing climate, I had heard through the grapevine that they were looking for somebody with Arctic health expertise and, you should consider applying. And so, like through, a colleague of a colleague of a colleague, I found out about the Government of Canada's nomination process. I submitted an application and was selected. And actually, that's where I first met Chris and got to know him. And then it was the first lead author meeting that we had for the SROC report was when the call for authors went out for the sixth assessment report cycle, which is sort of like what we're sitting here for now for the seventh assessment report cycle. And I just absolutely loved, like even on day one for SROC, how interdisciplinary things were, how engaged people were, how excited about climate change research and science people were. And I knew, like, I was hooked onto IPCC like right away. And I had applied on the last day to apply for AR6 Working Group 2 and was a lead author there. But if you like interdisciplinary experiences, if you like working with different people from, like using different knowledge systems and coming at the climate change problem from different angles or disciplines, definitely the IPCC is for you because it's like an interdisciplinary research experience on steroids. It's very, very intense. And you get to work with, climate physicists, ocean chemists, anthropologists, people that hold, indigenous knowledge holders, and at the intersection of climate change. So yeah, that's a little bit more about my IPCC story.
Excellent, thank you. And then we'll pass it on to Marina to introduce herself and tell her a little bit about her experience as well.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the invitation. My name is Marina Van Red. I'm a PhD candidate, almost finishing my PhD, hopefully. And yeah, well, my involvement in the, well, sorry, I didn't introduce myself correctly. I'm working at the University of Alberta, and my research goes around climate change and health in ocean and coastal communities, ocean ecosystems. And this is important because my background was a bit in biological sciences before my enrollment in the IPCC. Getting involved with the IPCC was more in the biological sciences, and then I transitioned into this public health epidemiology area, and it was kind of an abrupt change, but that was really helpful because I have heard of the IPCC before, but from this biological sciences perspective and not from this epidemiology, public health perspective. And I have never thought about getting involved in the IPCC. I was just, as Sherry, I was just citing the IPCC in my stuff, in my theses, in my presentations. But then I started working with a lead author during my PhD. So I saw at firsthand the role of the IPCC in policy science translation, and I just fell in love. So my involvement with the IPCC wasn't as an author itself, but started being as a student reviewer, which is a role that often flies under the radar, but it's actually a meaningful part of the broader network of people who actually support the assessment process behind the scenes. Because as you saw Sherry's numbers, this is huge. Like, we have tons of authors, well, more than 800 in the past report, and we'll have more maybe. And there are a lot of comments and edits and working based on these. So the IPCC needs a lot of people from different backgrounds. And these include early career researchers and students. So I was part of the AR6, and it all started through my research interest, particularly for me in marine ecosystems, climate change, and health. And at a time, I was an early career researcher and really curious about how science translates into global policy. And my supervisor was actually really, really good, and she was a lead author of the AR6. So I had the chance to support that process. First, just collating scientific literature, extracting key data points, and helping ensuring that relevant findings were properly represented. And that opened the door for me to engage more formally as a student reviewer. And it was a great experience because this experience made me realize how much work goes into synthesizing scientific knowledge for policy, and how actually crucial, rigorous, evidence-based reviews are in shaping this report, and obviously for climate action, that it's the final goal, right? Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, even from Sherilyn and Marina, it's really great to hear that there's so many ways to get involved with that. And so that kind of takes me to the next question, kind of narrowing down specifically on the last assessment cycle. So that was AR6. So maybe Sherry, we can start with you. Could you tell us specifically in AR6, what was your role and what did you learn?
Yeah, thanks. So in AR6, I was a lead author on the special report on oceans and cryosphere. I was a lead author on chapter 1, which was the framing chapter. It was a super interesting chapter because the goal of that chapter is to sort of like lay the groundwork for the subsequent chapter. So what different types of methods and assessment methods will be used, what types of different scenarios or pathways will be considered in the report, how Indigenous knowledge systems will be engaged, conceptualizing risk from an IPCC perspective and trying to mobilize that in the context of the report. It was a really fun chapter to be involved in. It's often a chapter that's smaller in terms of numbers than the other chapters, which is fun because you get to know the other lead authors on that chapter really, really well. And we all still stay in touch and exchange, family photos and things like that by email still to this day. So chapter 1, that was a really great experience for me. And then in AR6 Working Group 2 assessment report, I was a lead author on the North American chapter. I was also a contributing author to a couple of the other chapters, including the health chapter. I was also an author on some of the cross-chapter boxes on some of the other chapters. And on both the SROC report and AR6 Working Group 2, I was an author on the summary for policymakers. Okay, so those are lots of different buzzwords. Let me break it down a little bit. Whether you're a lead author or not, you can contribute as an author, as a contributing author. So basically, a lead author will tap you on the shoulder and say, would you be interested in doing an assessment on this topic? So actually, it was in SROC that Chris had tapped me on the shoulder and said, would you be interested in doing some health assessment in the polar regions chapter for us? So even though I was a lead author on chapter 1, I also did some work for Chris on the polar chapter. So he said, here's the scope of your assessment, here's how long it should be. could you produce something? Then I produced it. He provided comments and edits. When the review comments came back, he passed me those and said, could you respond to those and make edits? And we went back and forth on that. So he managed that process. Now you can be a contributing author, even if you're not a lead author. So getting to know who the lead authors are can be helpful because you can reach out to them and say, I have expertise in these different topics. If you're looking for somebody, I'm available. I'm very interested. Contributing authors can also be selected from the list of lead authors who are not selected. So sometimes you get sort of cold emailed or cold called from the lead authors asking you to contribute that way. So there's lots of different ways to be involved. Oh, and cross-chapter boxes, these are things that sit at the intersection between different chapters on different topics. So lots of different ways to be involved, lots of hats to wear. And those are some of the things, the ways that I participated in the 6th assessment cycle.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that's also a great segue to Chris, if you can expand more on your role in AR6 and then also what you learned.
Sure. So yeah, in AR6, I was the lead author, one of the lead authors on the Polar Regions chapter of the SROC. And just so everyone's clear, Sherry already talked about this, but there is like an author hierarchy or author structure. There are coordinating lead authors. They are above the lead authors. They're really the ones who are responsible for pulling all the chapter material together at the highest level. There's some tasks they then delegate down to lead authors. Lead authors do a lot of the text writing, a lot of the assessment process lies with the lead authors. And then when there's a gap in your expertise, that's exactly as Sherry described, you then go to a contributing author, you ask them, can you please provide me material? But then as the lead author, you're ultimately responsible for taking that text, revising that text, and integrating it into your chapter. And I think every chapter is managed differently depending on the approach of the CLAs, the chapter lead authors. And I had a great experience working on the chapter I was involved in. Near the end of the process, the CLAs kind of command of the chapter did all the final editing themselves so that there was one more common voice for the chapter. But I think the actual execution of every chapter is different. It's just important to understand where you might slot in as a CLA, an LA, or a CA. Lots of acronyms, of course. So your job as an author, really, it's pretty broad-based. You have to perform the assessment. So for the chapter I was working on, I was tasked with doing snow, sea ice, and freshwater ice. So you have to read a lot of papers. You have to write the assessment text. You have to guide the chapter through the review process and IPCC protocols that you respond formally to every single review comment, which there are thousands on every chapter. So that takes a long time, obviously, and you have to divide that up between the different authors. You have to start compiling and providing input into figures for each chapter. And then if you're fortunate enough to work on well, I guess there's also chapter key messages. This was a really important role for the chapters as well. These chapters are very long. Some might say too long. They're getting longer. So what you really need to do is distill out the most important assessment statements for every chapter. Those are the key messages from each chapter. Those key messages, in turn, are kind of massaged into the summary for policymakers. And so, like Sherry, I was a SPM author for the SROC. And so that process, that writing process, is a little bit separate from the chapter. And it's that summary for policymakers that goes to the panel for review and approval. That process, I have to say, as an author, is very challenging because it's a text by text, a line by line review of the text by all member countries of the panel. And you're basically, as an author, facing that panel and asked very quickly on short notice, can you change the wording of this? Can you provide alternate wording on that? And so it's a really live editing kind of process, which sometimes goes well and often does not. So it really forces you to think quickly on your feet. And that's so that's a very different, the FPM process is different from the assessment writing process, but it's a really key part of the IPCC process as well. One thing I've been fortunate enough to do is participate on both sides of the table. So I've been at the approval process as an author. I've been at the approval process as a delegate for the Government of Canada. I have to say it's a much more enjoyable and rewarding experience being there as an author. You're surrounded by your colleagues and people you trust and enjoy working with and have been working with for years. As a delegate, you're surrounded by many different governments with many different priority agendas. And so it gets very difficult to have your voice heard, whereas your voice can be heard very clearly as an author. And I think that's one of the most rewarding parts of the whole process. I think I'll sort of wrap up here at a few more things I was going to emphasize. Maybe when it comes to like, what did I learn from this whole process? I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that the assessments are becoming more challenging, right? So the amount of literature for authors to assess is increasing dramatically. So you have more material to work through. I think there's an increasing challenge to make a clear differentiation from what's been assessed previously, right? So in AR7, we don't want to repeat an assessment from AR6. You want to focus on what are the new developments in the field, what are the most policy relevant developments in the field. The whole process has become more transparent with respect to data sharing. Transparency from top to bottom now is, critical, as it should be, but maybe it wasn't quite as transparent if you go back to the third or fourth assessment cycle. And I think the whole work of the panel, the approval process, is becoming more political. So the IPCC is a science process, really. The UNFCCC is the negotiation space. The IPCC is the science space when it comes to climate change. But of course, those lines do start to get blurred. And so I think you just need to be a little bit aware as potential authors that you're entering into a space, a scientific space, that unfortunately has become a bit more politicized in recent years. And Sherry, as a Bureau member representing Canada, could speak to that way more than I can. But just be aware that this is the interface between science, policy, and politics. And so you have to be ready to navigate those waters a little bit. Maybe the final thing I'll say is like the question about what did I learn? Well, I just feel that the IPCC process forced me to mature as a scientist. So it really makes you be responsible for the work that you've done, be able to speak to the work that you've done, be able to work in a high pressure environment, because maybe I'll talk about this more in an answer to the third question that the panel will face, but it is a high pressure environment. You have timelines that you have no wiggle room on. So it really does force you to work seriously. And I think that's really a good thing. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks, Amira.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, from both of you, it sounds like a really great environment if you're somebody who loves a dynamic work, intersectoral collaboration, and all that great stuff. And so kind of go into the back end. I know that Marina mentioned that she's a student reviewer. And so Marina, you can speak a little bit more to that in terms of what your role in AR6 is.
Yeah, sure. Well, the process itself, it's really interesting, and it's a really like a great opportunity for early careers, including students, because first of all, you need to submit your CV. And for everything, you need to submit your CV, and starting planning on what should I put on my CV. It's important, right? Because you have done so many things, and you need to put things that are relevant for the IPCC and show your expertise. So you need to indicate clearly your area of expertise and interest. And once you're accepted, you get access to these draft reports along with a shared template. It can be an Excel, a Google Doc, a shared template, but where you can submit your comments. And that's the most interesting part, because as an early career, you get access to this document, and it's exciting and encouraging because you can comment on authors' sentences on the report. So authors have to respond to every single comment, whether they accept your suggestion or not. They are required to explain the reasoning. So for me, that was super rewarding, because having the opportunity to comment on an official document as an early career and having the response from an author, it gives you, first of all, it gives you the experience of why my edit is relevant for the IPCC or why not. Not only they are deleting your comments, no, they have to respond that this is publicly available. But also, so as a student and early career, your input is taken seriously. And that's a big deal. It's a fantastic learning opportunity. So during AR6, I work closely with the lead author, focusing on a specific section of the report. And my role involves synthesizing relevant evidence, summarizing literature, helping to connect the science to the broader climate change narrative. And well, you are not an author. Well, in that case, I wasn't an author myself. I got a behind the scenes look at how these massive assessments come together. And I saw just how, again, the rigorous and collaborative the review process really is. And as Sherry said, the opportunity of work with an interdisciplinary and sectorial group it's also great, because as a student you usually have access to your research group, right? Which is I don't know, if you're a biologist, then you have other biologists around you, but you don't usually have the opportunity to chat with an anthropologist or a sociologist or epidemiologist. And in this case, you can. And you can see also their comments. So it's a great professional opportunity from learning experience perspective, but also reviewers' names are also credited in the annex of expert reviewers for the working group 1, 2, or 3. And this is available, so you have the credit for your work. And yeah, well, one of the biggest takeaways for me was realizing the importance of early career contributions. We often bring in fresh perspective, recent literature, obviously, and obviously the eagerness to dive into details, because some of these details are new. And also, well, as Chris said, I feel like something important is noticing what your expertise are, and not only about the topic, but also if you have skills. So there is a communication importance of the IPCC. So if you have visualization skills or synthesizing skills, that this is also relevant for the IPCC, because they need to translate science to policy, but also to make it clearly and accessibly for policymakers and also for the general audience. We don't want to write just one more paper, like scientific paper, but make it accessible to more people. So yeah, I feel like I will leave it there for the next question.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, it seems like I'm seeing quite a few common themes here, that with your expertise, there's so much that you can give, and there's also so much that you can learn from the authorship process. And I think that speaks to the essence of the climate change and working in this kind of field, that it really is a give and take. And so with that, come to our last question. What is some advice that each of you would give to an IPCC author or someone who wants to become a reviewer for the AR7 report? So with that, I will actually go to Marina first.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Well, first of all, get excited. It is an exciting role. I would think if you like your research, if you like policies like science policy translation, and you want to bring all the research as we are doing, because we are doing so much, we need to communicate it somehow. We need to put it in action. So get excited. And if you really want to get involved in AR7, start by registering as an expert reviewer or contributing author if you want. For an expert reviewer, you don't need to be a senior scientist. You need to have some relevant expertise in climate change and the area, but you don't need to be a senior scientist. Your perspective is valuable. Reach out to people in your network who are already involved. If your supervisor or colleagues are contributing, offer to support their work. That's how I got started. Get familiar with how the IPCC works. So coming to this meeting, it's a great step, because Sherry already explained a bit of this. Get familiar how the drafts are developed, how comments are submitted and addressed, and where different kinds of expertise are needed. So the topics that Sherry, Annie, and the IPCC website are listed. And finally, I would say, be ready to learn a lot. This is a lot of work involved. I see some questions about workload. So yeah, you have to fit it around other work, because it's an intense experience. But it really opens your eyes to the science policy interface. And I feel like researchers, we need to do more of that. And it also gives you a voice in one of the most important global conversations at this time. So yeah, being part of the review process gave me appreciation of for the role that early career researchers can play. Whether you're reviewing, assisting with literature, aiming to become a future author, there is definitely a place for you in this process. And remember that your contributions matter for everything at any level.
Excellent. Thank you, Marina. And next we'll go to Chris. And so just Chris and Sherry, I'll ask you to keep your answers short because we do have quite a few questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Great, thanks, Mary. Yeah, I'll be brief. I wrote down just 4 things here to emphasize. One, for advice. Number 1 would be, and I've kind of already mentioned this, you need to be willing to work across a broad area. So the chapter I was involved in for SROC, we were covering all elements of the polar regions, both polar regions, from a working group 1 and a working group 2 perspective. That's a ton of material, right? Including marine ecosystems, the cryosphere, impacts on human systems. We had 2 CLAs and 8 lead authors, so 10 people to do all that material. So obviously, if you could only work in your niche area, you would need to have 25 LAs, and you just don't have that freedom. So you have to be willing and comfortable to expose yourself to some new material that's maybe on the fringes of what you would be comfortable working in. That's just part of the process. Number 2 is you need to always bear in mind that this is an assessment process, not a review process. The distinction between the 2 is really important, and I think the most effective IPCC chapters and all the reports are those that really take that assessment lens. We're trying to identify the state of knowledge, the key uncertainties, and what that means from a policy point of view. So really, it's an assessment, not a review. That's really important. Third thing, super practical, you need to be tolerant of reviewing, re-reviewing, rewriting the same text over and over and over again, because there's a first order draft, a second order draft, a final draft. Then you spin off the key messages into a summary for policymakers. You're looking at the same text over and over again, and you're refining it, you're crafting it, you're making it better, you're responding to review comments. So you really have to be tolerant of immersing yourself in some text and living with that text for a long time, and it gets burned into your brain. So you really have to be expecting that that's kind of the way things sort of play out. Finally, sort of like from a mode of work point of view, you need to formally carve out time to do this. You need to stop doing things you were doing before, because this will become a major part of your workload. And so if you think you can just take on this work without stopping doing something else, for myself at least, that wasn't practical. You have to stop doing something else. You have to be very organized because the deadlines are fixed and there's no flexibility. And maybe most importantly, you have to play nicely with the other kids in your group. I mean, you're working, this is group work. You're working as a part of an author team. You do not choose your author team. You do not choose your CLAs. You do not really get to choose your CAs in many cases. You are put into a group environment and you hope for the best. And so the more constructively you can work with others, the more patient you can be with others, that will help make this a very pleasant experience. But it is, you know, a group dynamic, and you don't control the formation of that group. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks, Amira.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll pass it over to Sherry.
I just want to echo everything that everyone said already. I would say that overall, be prepared to have a lot of fun too. Like I just picking up on a lot of the other comments, you learn and grow so much as a researcher going through this process, because you are literally working alongside the best of the best from like every discipline at the intersection of climate change you can think of. And it's such a rewarding experience too, because I think, at least on the academic side of things, if you're calling in from a university, at least myself, I often wonder, like, is what I'm doing, does it actually matter? Is anyone actually reading the paper that I'm writing, or is this actually leading to some sort of change? And I think that a lot of us in academia are hungry for that. We're looking for our work to have impact or influence. And I can say that through the IPCC process, you get to experience that and you get to see that actually happen. You know, if you are an author on the summary for policymakers, like Chris said, you get to hear lots of government interventions, and you get to like really function and act at that science policy interface. And you get to see what governments like actually really care about in the context of climate change, and what evidence matters to them. And that was a really valuable experience for me. So, you know, I would also say prepared to like to be willing to learn and grow. The last thing I'll just comment on is if you're interested in being an author, but your area expertise hasn't really been covered by past reports, we probably need you. So apply. Just because it was undercovered or inequitably covered or unjustly covered in past reports doesn't mean that it's not important. And it doesn't mean that the IPCC doesn't recognize it as important. So apply, because we likely need your expertise to, to do a more comprehensive, in-depth, robust, rigorous report that's useful for policymakers. Yeah, I think that I'll leave it there to leave more space for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, that was a really great feedback. Those really great learnings. So yes, Q&A. One of the questions, or maybe a few of the questions that consistently comes up, is talking about time commitments. So it seems that there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts. And so do you find that there are certain trade-offs that you might need to make? And then what are certain time commitments when it regards to maybe travel or even funding requirements? Anybody who'd like to answer can go ahead and jump in.
I can kick us off. I think that it takes as much or as little time as you give it in a lot of ways. I've heard that if you want to be a coordinating lead author, that can take up to a third of your work time, which is a lot. A lead author is less intensive for sure, definitely not a third of your work time. But if you are really excited about the topic and participate in many different roles and are on different cross-chapter boxes and are a lead author and a contributing author on other chapters, it can take up a lot of your time. But you can manage your time, and there are different ways to manage that as well. And like, just talk to any past lead author and they can give you tips and tricks on how to effectively manage your time, because it could take all of your time if you let it. So it's really about time management, which I think Chris had mentioned before. So there are 4 lead author meetings that you're required to be there right now in person. We're definitely exploring opportunities to have online lead author meetings, but that's obviously challenging in terms of like internet accessibility and considerations, especially in the global South, to ensure proper opportunities for full engagement and participation. So 4 in-person lead author meetings with intersessional work in between. So it depends on your chapter and your coordinating lead authors on how often and frequently you meet online in between those meetings. But close to the due dates, it could be once or twice a week even to have those meetings. And they could be at all hours of the day, because you're working with colleagues from all around the world. Usually those cycle through, so you don't always have to be getting up in the middle of the night. But you might have to take a turn every once in a while getting up in the middle of the night to attend these international online meetings. So yeah, that's my experience anyways, but I don't know about others.
Or maybe I would just add to that there's an ebb and flow to the time commitment. So it's not a consistent thing. Every week isn't the same. As you're approaching some of the deadlines, when you have a deadline to make sure all the 5,000 review comments for your chapter have been answered, that may be almost 100% of your time. I definitely went through periods where nearly 100% of my time for like a week or two was dedicated to IPCC work. So in that sense, you have to be, I was fortunate as a government scientist, I have quite a bit of flexibility and a lot of support that to dedicate my time to that. For other people in different positions, that will be more challenging, of course. But yeah, there really is an ebb and flow. As you're coming up on the deadline for when a draft submission is due for your chapter, it's going to take a lot more time. So it ebbs and flows. I think the numbers Sherry gave are very reasonable for kind of the average, but it'll definitely be some weeks it's 0. You don't have to do any work. There's nothing happening. It's quiet time. And then some weeks it's 110% of your time.
Excellent, thank you. And if Marina, if you want to speak to maybe time commitment as a reviewer as well.
Yeah, for sure. It varies. As Sherry and Chris mentioned, it is time that you will need to put. So you need to fit it in your current workload, in your current lifestyle. So it's one more thing, but it's time management, right? So I guess as a reviewer, it's easier than a lead author because you can fit it during your work. I used to, I don't know, in the evenings after finishing my work, or maybe assigning half of a day to just review and put some comments. So it is workload, but it is definitely possible, and you just need to make it fit in your day. And I mean, it's also, if you really want to participate in this, and it becomes one of maybe your priorities, so you put it within your schedule to work on it. So yeah, maybe 1 or 2 half days of your work during some weeks, obviously not all the time. As an expert reviewer, you won't be working all the time because you need to wait for authors to send you the drafts or send you some papers or send you something to review. So it's kind of different, definitely.
And I will say, if I could just add one quick thing in, like, so it seems like, like coordinating lead author, most required time, followed by lead author, followed by contributing author, followed by, oh, sorry, I forgot review editor in there. Coordinating lead author, review editor, contributing author, reviewer. So those are sort of like in terms of like ranking the time commitment. So I would say, no matter how busy you are, if you're interested in the process, there's some role that will fit with your schedule for you to, like engage with the process. So if you're really super busy and have no time to spare, but you're really interested in climate change and the climate change science policy interface, look into being a reviewer, because like Marina said, those review comments really matter and really do shape the report. So it's time well spent to even serve in that role. So no matter how busy you are, I think that there's definitely a role for you if you're interested in this space.
Excellent, thank you. There are a few comments in the chat looking at funding. So I know there's variations of funding you can get. And so maybe you guys can speak to that potentially. Not sure if the government of Canada actually provides anything at this point, but I think, yeah, we want to talk about that.
I think that Leslie might cover that in her presentation, but Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, Leslie will provide the details. I mean, I think unfortunately at this point there is not a funding program in place for Environment and Climate Change Canada, which houses the Secretariat. So we haven't talked about the Secretariat. Leslie will talk about that, but that's kind of the organizing body that keeps Canadian contributions to the IPCC organized. Leslie will speak to the funding or lack thereof on the Secretariat side for participants coming up, but Sherry, you might want to speak. There's been, I think, a few questions about like teaching releases and things like that for our academic sector colleague too. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, the funding question, yeah, Leslie will be able to comment on that a little bit. There, you can talk to your university vice president research. There might also be opportunities through the Tri-Council coming up. We're sort of like in this interesting moment in time, considering the geopolitical context. I would say don't let that hold you back from applying. If you get selected, it's a very competitive process, but if you get selected, I'm like, as a bureau member, I'm really happy to work with you to try and identify funding to help you cover the travel costs. And, pretty dedicated to trying to figure something out. If for some reason that like doesn't happen, or whatever, it doesn't mean that you're on the hook for that. We can cross that bridge when we get there. So really, I think for me anyways, my personal perspective is we want the best of the best, and the people who are most excited and like really interested in this topic and have especially skill sets or knowledge sets or diverse knowledges that have been inequitably covered in past reports. So we'll see what we can do about the travel funding. In terms of your time, the reports, universities usually consider these to be pretty prestigious reports, and when the report release comes, they'll probably put you all over their university's webpage, and you'll get lots of press coverage and lots of interest from the public and the media about the topic. So universities are usually pretty interested in that process. It depends on your university, and it depends on who your dean is, and it probably also depends on who your vice president research is in terms of things like teaching release or research assistants to help with that. as soon as you find out that you're selected, having that conversation early on is probably a good idea. I have colleagues that got completely, released from all teaching responsibilities, which obviously helps you contribute in a lot more in-depth detail. Or you could be like me, who had no teaching release to participate, but I still managed. And I still got a lot out of the process. I mean, we're talking a lot about the time commitments and all of these other sort of barriers. On the flip side of that, I would say that the rewards are pretty substantial. It's a lot of fun. You develop amazing relationships with colleagues from around the world. You expand your own understanding of climate change. I was, challenged in so many different positive ways throughout the process. That it is a really rewarding process, despite these barriers and challenges. But again, if you are selected, happy to have meetings with you one-on-one to talk through and brainstorm different places you could look for, different workload releases to try and manage your schedule in different ways. There's other things you can do to manage your time to keep it manageable, and also to have synergies between what you're doing in your research program and in your teaching, and between what you're doing in IPCC. And the more you're able to sort of like synergize things, the better. And so also happy to talk to anyone who's selected to talk about how to do that, to, sort of like make your IPCC work count for more than one thing, can also be really helpful in terms of getting it all done.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. So there's also some questions in terms about qualifications. So some people are considering themselves more social scientists, some people are considering themselves more natural scientists. And so they're wondering, is there maybe a tiered system, or can one get involved more than the other? Or do you even have to be a researcher in academia to be involved? So maybe Chris, if you want to speak to that first.
I mean, I think from your research background or your expertise background, it really depends on the working group that you align yourself with. And then even within each working group, there's some breadth as well. So working group one, that's the natural, change it to the climate system, the physical basis of climate change. And so that tends to be natural scientists who fit best with that theme. But working group two, which, Sherry can speak to better than I can, it's quite broad because there's always still a bit of physical climate change in working group two, but that's really impacts and adaptation. So in that sense, you're getting into the economics, risk and exposure. A lot of these aspects that start to move away from the traditional core of like the physical basis of climate change. That's the scope of working group two. Then working group three, which is the one that I'm least familiar with, mitigation. Again, many different subfields here away from the traditional sort of physical climate science background needed. So I would say, don't let your background be a limiting factor. Look closely at the chapter outlines. So there are scoping documents available that show exactly from the scoping meeting that occurred in December, how the Bureau is kind of scoping out all three working groups. Each chapter has a set of bullets that outlines what they're looking for. So if you can find a good home for your expertise, you have three working groups, three long outlines to look at. That's a really good basis to kind of figure out where your expertise best fits.
Sure, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, yeah, totally agree. And there's no ranking of like, physical scientists or physicists are more important expertise, and we're going to select more of them than social scientists. Truly, we need all different expertise. And so I would say it doesn't matter what your expertise is, or what set of knowledge systems that you hold, or if you're an Indigenous knowledge holder, definitely need Indigenous knowledge holders in this assessment report, absolutely required and needed. So we need everyone. One helpful tip or trick for your actual application package, look at those chapter outlines, like Chris said, and there's these bullets under each chapter outline. And we have to make sure that we have expertise to cover all of those bullets. So in your, keyword description, or the three articles that you choose to highlight in your application, if you can hit on at least one, but if not two or three of those bullets, that's really helpful, because then that assures us that, that we have the right expertise for the chapter. So all expertise is needed. But for example, if you're an Indigenous knowledge holder, and look through those bullet lists and definitely select the chapters that have, I mean, all chapters are relevant for Indigenous knowledge systems, but the ones that have Indigenous knowledge listed in the indicative bullets, it's like a requirement, like we have to cover that expertise, and making that very clear, that you're an Indigenous knowledge holder for those chapters is really helpful when we're going through literally thousands of applications to like select a diversity of disciplines and knowledge holders and knowledge systems for the different chapters. But there's no ranking, that's for sure.
And maybe just to flag one more thing is that when the Bureau compiles the author teams, they're looking at a few different metrics to ensure a diverse author teams. And one of those is previous IPCC experience. And the goal is not to have everybody working on the chapter have worked on the IPCC previously. It's quite the opposite. I think that the Bureau wants different career stages, different geographies, obviously, different backgrounds, and different levels of experience with the process. You want to bring in new people. That's how you refresh the whole process. So again, the fact that maybe you haven't participated as an author before, that should not at all limit your application, because those are exactly the types of people that need to be brought on to each of the chapter teams.
And an example of that, on the city's special report, half of the lead authors have IPCC experience and the other 50% don't, because it's really helpful to have that institutional memory and knowledge about how IPCC works. But we also need fresh ideas and new ways of thinking about things. So those people without IPCC experience are, there's no ranking there, that both are really, really needed. And I just want to add just like one more comment on the funding that I think is important. The IPCC has a trust fund that funds researchers from the Global South to attend meetings. So I just want to make that clear that the trust fund does not cover, IPCC trust fund does not cover researchers from the Global South to attend the lead author meetings, but they do for lead authors from the Global South.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll take one last question. So this one is from Rashid Somalia. So can one be nominated for more than one working group?
From a Bureau side of things, yes. I don't know if Government of Canada has a rule on that, but from the Bureau side of things, we absolutely anticipate people being nominated to more than one working group, because a lot of people have expertise that fit across the different working groups. Chris already commented that his expertise sits at the intersection between working group 1 and working group 2. And that's the way a lot of people, especially working in this very interdisciplinary space, work. And sometimes the silos of IPCC, although helpful and from, I guess, maybe a government side of things helpful, they can be sort of artificial siloing of physical science, impacts, adaptation, and mitigation. Your expertise could sit in more than one. But I'll leave the question on the Government of Canada nomination process to Leslie specifically. Unless, Chris, you know the answer.
No. Oh, okay, excellent. So does anybody want to ask questions verbally at all? I do know there are some questions in the chat about nomination, and so I think you should hold those, because we do have a presentation on what the nomination process actually looks like. Okay, so I don't see any at the moment. So again, you can still put everything in the Q&A, still put everything in the chat. And then with that, I will actually pass it back over to Sherry Lee to introduce the Canadian Secretariat. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. Thanks to the panelists. Really interesting to hear your perspectives and experiences. I hope that gave everyone on the call a sense of, like behind the scenes, what it's like to be an author, the time commitments involved, maybe some tips or tricks for your application. And most of all, I hope that it enticed you to apply to be part of the process. So now that we have a clear understanding of what it's like to be an author, I'm really delighted to turn it over to Leslie Craig from the Canadian IPCC Secretariat to walk us through how you can apply to be an author in the 7th assessment cycle. Leslie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to meet you all somewhat electronically. I am Leslie Craig, as Sherry introduced, and I work in Canada's Secretariat to the IPCC, housed within Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I believe my slides are just arriving on the screen. Perfect. Thank you. If we could move to the next slide, please. Wonderful. So as you heard earlier today, the IPCC is calling for nominations for AR7 for coordinating lead authors, and review editors for the 3 working group contributions. They are also rather calling for experts to serve on the task group on data support for climate change assessments. So this is another way that people can be involved in the 7th assessment cycle. And this group would really provide support to the authors and the institution, providing guidance on the curation, traceability, stability, the availability and transparency of data and scenarios related to the reports of the IPCC. So this is really vital foundational work that gets done. So we have a process within the Secretariat to receive and consider applications for submission to the IPCC. So we do have a deadline to receive applications from yourselves set at 5:00 p.m. Pacific time on April 7th, 2025. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is, as I just mentioned, the process that we have. So I'll give you a little quick overview of this, and then we'll talk about a few aspects in a little bit more depth. So after the IPCC launches its call, we share a call for nominations out through a very extensive email distribution list, and that information, how to reach us, will be on the screen earlier and will be shared with you. So if you would like to be in touch with us for this nomination, for future nominations, or just to generally be aware of what is happening with the IPCC and Canada's involvement, we'd be happy to add you to that list. So as I mentioned, we do set an application deadline is several days in advance of the IPCC's deadline to allow time for us to review and assess the nominations that we've received. They are all considered by a Government of Canada review committee that's composed of Canadian scientists and experts who are actively engaged in science assessments or climate change policy development. And they're responsible for reaching consensus on a list of recommended candidates for Canada's focal point to put forward to the IPCC. So we will inform everybody of the status of their nomination that has come through us and whether it's been forwarded to the IPCC, but it is up to the IPCC itself and the Bureau to take the decisions on who will be invited to serve as an author. And it is the IPCC that will nominate you as to whether or not your application has been accepted. Next slide. Perfect. So just to give you a sense of what that application form looks like, you're seeing the blue form on the right of the screen. There is a snapshot of one of the working group nomination forms. So I realize that this is perhaps a little pedantic, but I will just ask everyone, when you are looking at the nomination, please make sure that you are filling in every field that has a red star beside it. They are mandatory, and we will not be able to upload your form if anything is missed. You will have the opportunity to identify your areas of expertise, and that is done sort of in your own language as you choose to describe your expertise. And then you'll have the chance to select which chapters you would like to be nominated for and which role specific to each chapter, and then to share some details on your publications. So there is a different form for each working group. So those are available on the IPCC's website, and we can also email them to you. And again, the information on that will be on the last slide here today. So in addition to the, oh, no, please go back. Thank you. So in addition to the nomination form, we do also require a CV, maximum of 4 pages. Again, that if the CV is longer than 4 pages, the IPCC nomination portal will not accept it. So we do ask you to be very intentional in preparing that and providing it. And I think we did hear some questions earlier. Yes, so experts can be nominated for each of the 3 contributions to the AR7, and each working group assigns a maximum number of chapters and roles that an expert can be nominated for. So we don't set any additional requirements beyond what the IPCC set. So if you want to apply for all three, you want to apply for two of the three, whatever that might look like to you. And each form will tell you, as you can see here, this particular form, there was a maximum of 5 chapters that people could apply to for this working group. Each form for each working group will tell you what the maximum is that the IPCC has determined. So next slide, please. Perfect. So we welcome submissions from experts who hold Canadian citizenship and or who live and work in Canada. And so the review committee that I mentioned, when they're looking at these assessments, they're primarily just considering expertise, really the relevance of the applicant's expertise to the call for nominations. So does the CV demonstrate the expertise that you have indicated in the nomination form? They may consider the significance of the scientific contribution and the international and the possibility of international experience. Those latter two are not necessarily, the international experience is not a requirement. It is simply something that we do consider when looking at the nominees to put forward who are going to be working in an international environment with folks from many other countries. We are also looking to put forward a pool of nominees to the IPCC that is reflective of the breadth and depth of expertise across Canada. And so the review committee will consider as appropriate coverage across the 3 working groups, gender and geographic balance, a mix of experts with and without previous IPCC experience, and expertise from a range of organizations, which could include, but again, not limited to, governments, universities, Indigenous organizations, private sector, civil society, and so on. Next slide. Perfect. So as I mentioned, you're welcome to email us to request copies of the nomination forms. You can also access the nomination forms directly on this website that is listed there. And we'll make sure that that information gets popped in the chat so that it's relatively easy for you to find. Now, there were some questions earlier oh, no, sorry, you can just stay back on that's just in case anybody has questions about the process, but Sherry already covered it. So we can just stay here with the contact information for anyone who would like a couple minutes to jot that down. There were some questions earlier about funding. So unfortunately, due to current fiscal realities, we're not able to commit to providing long-term funding for experts to participate in meetings at this time. Consideration could be given to exceptional circumstances where support is required, but we do really encourage everyone to think about availability of funding as they're preparing their submissions. So I'm open to questions, but I might need someone to assist me if there are questions in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leslie. Just looking through the questions at this point in time.
I have a question, Leslie, in the chat. It says, it's bounced around. Do you need to be based at a Canadian institution, or can a US-based Canadian apply through the Government of Canada mechanism?
A US-based Canadian can apply through the Government of Canada mechanism. You would need to hold Canadian citizenship, and you would need to note that in the application that you submit so that we're aware that you have that connection.
Okay, there's another question. And then maybe Amira, I'll turn it over to you to find the next question while I read this one out. So this question, could you clarify, I think we already did that one actually, the different ways to apply. The Government of Canada is one option, but there are other ways to apply as well. I don't know, Leslie, if you wanted to elaborate on that at all. This is the Government of Canada mechanism, but there are other ways to be nominated.
Yeah, so I mean, really just to repeat what Sherry had mentioned earlier, you're welcome to submit your nominations through us through this process, but there are other avenues to apply through observer organizations in particular, and we really welcome everyone to determine the avenue that best works for them and their needs.
Excellent, thank you.
And we can share.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we can share a list of observer organizations as well. The IPCC hosts a list on their website, so we can make that available if anyone would like to follow up on that route.
you. And so with that, and there's another question that was saying that previously it was mentioned that the literature is getting more challenging to review because there's so much of it. Are there more experts in general being enlisted in the IPCC process as a result?
Ooh, that is a Sherry question. I'm going to defer to her on that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions about how to manage that. There's already, since AR6, there is more climate change literature available than there was in the entire AR6 cycle. So we know that literature is literally growing exponentially in this area, and it's a huge challenge. There's lots of ways we're trying to grapple with this, even including things like more systematic or automated approaches to identifying literature, using AI in certain ways, but not others. All these things are currently being discussed and explored. So I don't have an answer, except to say that it's something that I think will have to be something that we have to grapple with this assessment cycle and come up with some solutions. There's already a shift in trying to assess more systematic literature reviews than individual studies when possible, but we know that creates certain gaps or biases. So it's actually quite a complex question. And if you're interested in this question, I think it's something that authors will face. And if you have any expertise in this topic about how to manage huge volumes of literature and do assessment on these types of things, we need that expertise and knowledge, and that would be a valued skill set as well. Okay, I can read the next question. For those of us with dual nationality, does it matter which country we apply through?
So for Canada's process, we are looking at nominations from folks either who hold Canadian citizenship or who are based in Canada and working out of Canada. So if you hold citizenship from a different country, but you are working in Canada, we would welcome your nomination. If you are working in a different country, but you hold Canadian citizenship and you want to send us your application, we welcome that. If that's a broader question about if you hold dual citizenship, does it matter? Maybe I'll turn to Sherry sort of in the IPCC context, if there's anything you wanted to share on that.
Yeah, in terms of like strategy, in the sixth assessment cycle, I had heard things like, if you have more than one government nominate you, that increases your chance of being selected. Now that I'm on the Bureau and sort of see the other side of things, I can say that's not necessarily true. Your name doesn't show up more than once on the list. It's only once on the list, and there's like an extra column that says you were nominated by more than one person. And that doesn't really factor in, in my experience, it hasn't factored in anyways. It's more about your what expertise you bring, things like what region you're representing or what region you've listed your citizenship as, gender balance, past IPCC experience, like all of these things factor into the decisions. In terms of regional selection, so we do try to balance regional expertise, like where different experts are coming from. And so you might be wondering, okay, how do you determine that if you have dual citizenship, say here in the UK? So if you listed your citizenship, so in the application form, you have to list one citizenship, like one country. So if you list Canada, you'll be considered under region 4, which is the North American region. If you list the UK, then you'd be considered under Europe. So whichever country you list that is where your citizenship is in the application form, that's where they sort of assign you in terms of what region you're representing, in case that helps. Amira, do you have another question queued up?
Yeah, we do. It's kind of similar to what we're talking about. Instead of dual citizenship, maybe a dual expertise. So if you have expertise in 2 working groups, would you be able to send 2 applications with their individual nomination forms, or is it just 1 application?
So you do have to complete each nomination form is specific to the working group. So you do have to complete the nomination form for whichever working group you are applying to. And so if you are applying to 2 working groups, you need to send us 2 nomination forms. I will leave it to your discretion if you want to just send 1 CV that covers your expertise for both and that you would like us to submit with those 2, or if you feel that it is customized CVs. But from from what we've seen from other folks, typically most people, I think, just send one CV. I know it's a lot of work writing a CV, so. But the nomination forms are specific and individual to each working group. So if you are considering multiple, do make sure that you're sending those in separately.
Excellent. And another question as well. We're looking towards maybe author costs. How much money annually or how much funding annually do you maybe need to plan out or maybe need to seek out to be able to go through this process?
So that's really challenging. And unfortunately, I can't put a specific number on that for any individual because it really depends on where you're based, where the meetings are going to be held, where you're traveling to, and what role you are holding. So unfortunately, at this point, we don't know where all of the author meetings will be yet. And so those are some unknowns.
I will say that so to participate as an author, the IPCC is very, very clear that doing the work is volunteer work, and you know, you might wonder why that is, and there's lots of different reasons why that is, but one important reason is that there's a common like climate skepticism, climate denier comment that climate scientists are in it for the money and IPCC authors are just doing it to get rich. So you're not allowed to be reimbursed by the IPCC for your time to participate in the process. So what does it cost? It costs, you need to make sure that your employer is okay that you're working on the report. If you're working at a university, I think that that's pretty easy because it's, you know, it's sort of like, it sort of sits at the interface between research and service in a lot of ways. So it like ticks that box as long as you can make time yourself to work on it, it's okay. But the hard cost is the travel. So there's 4 international lead author meetings throughout the cycle. When those lead author meetings will be, we don't know. We know we're going to have the first lead author meeting this calendar year. So there will be 1 lead author meeting this calendar year, and then there will be 3 additional ones sometime between now and 2029. Dates, locations to be determined. So the travel is the main expense. And like I said, anyone who's selected to be an author, I'm really happy to talk to them about that and to try and do my best to try and figure something out. There's one question in the chat, Leslie, that you might be interested in answering. Would you consider an applicant who works in a... Oh, sorry, Amira, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry there. I just had a problem with my sound for a second. So we have 2 more questions just so we can finish up really quickly. So the first one is, would you consider an applicant who works in a local government context and more of a climate policy, but doesn't necessarily have scientific publications?
Yeah, so we're open to applications from a wide range of different experts. And one of the things that the IPCC is looking for more and more, and that we've really seen more of an emphasis on this assessment cycle, is for practitioners. So people who have that practical hands-on experience. So definitely, but what I would say is do everything you can within your CV to highlight the relevance of your expertise. If you don't have those specific peer-reviewed publications that might be more traditionally anticipated, and that will just help strengthen your application.
Great, thank you. And then last question. So does one committee tend to evaluate all 3 working groups? So probably speak to the nomination process in terms of like how you can really get in.
Yeah. So for Canada's process, the review committee is made up of experts who have expertise across the range of working groups. So there's a good mix of folks who can take a look at that. I don't know, Sherry, if you wanted to speak a little bit more to the IPCC's process and how they sort of that next level.
So yeah, so once we receive the nominations from government, so after the Government of Canada, other governments and observer organizations have submitted their nominations, Then each working group looks at their authors, and we do rounds of selections. This takes a lot of time to do because there are a lot of amazing applicants, and making sure that everything is covered and that everything is balanced is no small task. And then we share that across the working groups for additional comments and expertise. Some people might be selected for more than one working group, so then we have to decide where they might fit best or how we might manage that. Or we might catch an expertise that's missing, or some sort of something that needs another consideration that needs to be added. And once we go through these many rounds, first at the working group level and then across the bureau, then the invitations are sent out. Sometimes we'll see that in the applicant pool, there are areas of expertise that are completely missing altogether. These are usually pretty rare because the applicant pool is usually pretty robust, but there are certain expertise that sometimes is a gap in the applicant pool. And then the Bureau will nominate people specifically to fill those gaps at that point. So that's sort of how the process works once we get the nominees from observer organizations and from governments.
Excellent, thank you so much. We are at the 12:30 mark, so maybe I'll pass it on to Sherry to give us a little wrap up.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, I think that's it from us. We hope that this session was valuable to you, and that we'll see some of your applications come through the process, and that you become an IPCC author. We've said it a few times, but just a reminder, any unanswered chat questions have been recorded, and we'll make sure to create an FAQ sheet and send that out to all of you to answer your questions. We'll be sending a thank you email shortly after the session with links to sources of information, as well as providing an opportunity to reply back with any other questions that you might have that didn't get answered. So thanks so much for everyone for joining us today. Thank you to all the panelists and the presenters. They were able to share their experiences with us.